Well, we come now to the cusp of one of my favorite holidays, which is Halloween. And just when Tim and I thought we had finally put the last line underneath everything needing to be done to get our house in Germantown on the market, our real estate broker, not so gently, reminded us that we needed to clear out our closets because they looked slightly crowded. We don't want to suggest, she said, that there isn't enough storage, and certainly there is plenty of storage in the house for clothes, but the builder never anticipated my wardrobe. So we've been taking things out and rooting around in the back of the closet. Once again, I have found treasures. So I'm going to show you what I found this week. Just bear with me one moment. I stand before you with a doorman's winter coat from the Plaza Hotel. Now, when I took that out and showed Tim, his only question was, why? And I said, it's a perfect Halloween costume at some time. And he said, well, I guess, as a doorman, you've upped the property value at St. Peter's because you can now say it's a doorman building. I promise I won't be wearing it very much, but it is funny. And after I had modeled it to Tim and taken great pride in it, I was reminded by Tim that I was 30 minutes late to go pick up dinner last night. So I thought, well, it's kind of cold. I'll keep the coat on. And I went down to pick up our dinner, and it was in the village at La Puerta Azul. And I pulled up, and I thought, I'll just run in and run out and get the food. It couldn't be easier. And it was very nice and toasty and warm. And I went up to the front door, and the owner was having a cigarette outside on the front porch. And he said to me, looking at what I was wearing, "What are you?" And I said, "A doorman." And he said, "Oh, which building in the city?" Humbled, I said, "It's a Halloween costume." And there could be, I guess, a wonderful meditation on why it's especially appropriate for a clergy person to have a doorman's costume, perhaps helping people on their spiritual journey. But I'll save that for a future Mouse article. Instead, I wanted to think about the idea of perception and how we see people, of how we come to judge and to know people in the process of our relationships. And of course, it's an important question. It's the central question in the gospel story this morning from Luke. The question is, how do we appear and how are we judged? But also, perhaps even more importantly, how do we judge other people based on appearance or assumptions? Now, it's a natural human phenomenon, probably rooted in some evolutionary characteristic that made us better. But it is a slippery slope. And as the gospel reminds us, it's a dangerous thing when it comes to getting in the way of building deep relationships with our neighbors, with other people that we love, but also in our relationship with God. The idea of authenticity and identity are central to the stories that Jesus teaches. Being true to yourself is what it's all about. Now, in the gospel story from Luke this morning, we have two men, we're told, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. And these are archetypes for the listeners to Jesus' parable. The Pharisees were seen as impeccable people of faith, kind of the Episcopalians of their time. And the tax collectors were despised for their corruption and dishonesty. And Jesus flips in this parable the world in which we enter this story. And the one who is labeled as dishonest is the one who is the most honest. And the one who prides himself on his honesty and integrity turns out to be something of a hypocrite. And in the telling of this story, we are meant to have our attention gotten by the surprise. No one would expect a Pharisee to be criticized, and it's very easy to label and criticize the tax collector. But Jesus challenges the hearers of the parable then and now to look more deeply into how we are in relationship with other people. How do we come to make decisions or judgments about others? It's very easy and actually very gratifying in some ways to make judgments. It assures us of our place and our identity in relationship to other people. It makes it easy because we can pigeonhole people into a certain thing or label without having to consider them more deeply. And perhaps even more terrifying is the idea that we can avoid having things become complex or more difficult. Dealing with the complexity of who people are and who they really are versus how we like to perceive them. So Jesus' words are a challenge to look more deeply in our perception of others, but also look more deeply into ourselves to avoid hypocrisy. Now, we live in an age of labels. We feel very much, and I think it's true now, more true now than it's ever been, that we are surrounded by the ways that we label and pigeonhole people. I don't have to go through the litany of what those labels might be, but we are constantly in our society saying, so-and-so is such and such. And therefore, you make a judgment about what that means. And you're not challenged to go more deeply into what that person's story might really be, what their real identity might be. But going more deeply is exactly what Jesus does again and again in the gospel stories. He looks into the heart of people and asks them who they are and who they want to be. So the very moving part of this parable is the tax collector, of course, who has led a life of brokenness, of dishonesty, corruption, but now wants a different life, if you will, a different label, and asks for God's help in making that so. You know, the Bible is really filled with stories that talk about who people are and who they want to become. We're meant to read these Bible stories as ways in which we can see ourselves in the story. And if you think about it, the Bible is nothing else but a gigantic collection of deeply personal stories about people who have struggled with their faith, been heroic, failed, won, been victorious or defeated. And they're meant to be very human stories that we can relate to, that we can see ourselves in. Because the truth of the gospel, and I think the truth of our relationship with God, is that we are challenged to know people more deeply. We are meant to build relationships of trust and commitment that go beyond any superficial label. We're meant to look deeply into people's lives and know who they are in a more profound way. One of my favorite plays from the 1990s was a play called Blown Sideways Through Life by Claudia Schiffer. And Claudia Schiffer was an actress and a playwright who, in order to support herself, as so many in that profession do in New York City, by taking odd jobs. And her jobs were truly odd. She had 90 different jobs over the course of her relatively short life that she had taken, and she told the story of some of those jobs. And what was wonderful is at the end of the play, the last scene is her telling about a dance class that she had taken as an aspiring actress. And she was very convinced that she couldn't dance and that she was restricted by her body. And the teacher in the class said, "Everyone must dance as if you hold the most precious jewel in the world in your chest, and dance with joy and abandon." And that was pretty wonderful to think about. But the line I really remember from the end of the play is when she says, "And now, having heard my story, I want you to be open to hearing other people's stories as well. All the people that you come across have a story that is so powerful that if you would just hear it, it would stop your heart." That's our challenge, I think, as a people of faith. To move past simple labels, judgments, perceptions, and open each other to the deepest hearts of who we are. Now, the Bible loves giving us beautiful images of what will happen if we follow God's commands, if we follow the way of our faith. And central, of course, to this is the telling and knowing and openness to our story and to others. But I love the way the psalm ends today that we just said, because it's an image of God's abundance, because that's the reward. Deeper, richer lives, grounded not in perception, but in authenticity, in who we really are, and our willingness to hear and to know people as they are. So I'll read you, I think, which is such a perfect part or image of God's abundance, especially in the place in which we live, this beautiful place. The promise is of an abundance and a beauty that will be part of our lives if we open ourselves to each other. And not just to people that we love and know, but all people. To see a story behind each person that we come across. So this is the reward. This is the richness if we live that committed life. You crown the year with your goodness, and your paths overflow with plenty. May the fields of the wilderness be rich for grazing, and the hills be clothed with joy. May the meadows cover themselves with flocks, and the valleys cloak themselves with grain. Let them shout for joy and sing. Let our shout be of joy and song as we celebrate a God that wants nothing more than to know us deeply and for us to know other people in his name. Amen.